What's up, guys? I'm finally back with my long overdue update to the 8 hardtails under $800 video. These are all 2020 bikes. There's a lot of good stuff out there, so stay tuned. So a while back I filmed a video, really just like a screen recording of me going over some bikes that I had researched. They were all hardtails, they were all under $800, there were 8 of them. They were all 2019 models, so all that information is really kind of out of date right now. So I've done some more research and compiled a list of 8 more hardtails. There's some new ones, there's some old ones, some things have changed. There's some really good stuff out there too. But before we get into any of the bikes, I just want to go over a handful of things that are kind of like a wish list of items you would want on the perfect hardtail. And you're probably not going to find all these things, especially at the $800 price range, but you kind of can get an idea of what's important to you, prioritize, and then go from there. So the first thing on this list, and these are in no particular order, but the first thing I want to mention is an air fork. A lot of budget bikes come with coil spring forks. Air forks are lighter, they give you more adjustability. You can put in the correct amount of air for your weight so that you get the right amount of sag, you can get the right amount of performance out of it. They will also have a rebound adjustment, which will control how quick the fork comes back to you after it's been compressed. You know, because you don't want it just like springing you back up, which those coil spring forks will do. So next up, and this one's counterintuitive, but if you're a complete beginner, you know, this may help you out. The fewer gears, generally, the better. Gone are the days where you see bikes that advertise 24 speeds, 27 speeds. You know, if you see something like that, probably not good. And the reason for that is you'll have basically 3 gears up front, 8, 7 in the back, something like that. And it's a lot of parts, a lot of things to go wrong. The front derailleurs never really work right. There's too much chain to accommodate for all the different gearing sizes, that the chain will fall off a lot, clanks around. It's just not a really good system. So fewer gears are better, and you know, you would really want a 1x system, so 1 gear in the front and then as many in the back with the highest range in the back that you can find. So next up are the brakes. You really want to find something with disc brakes. Primarily you'd want them to be hydraulic. Outside of that, you know, a low end of Shimano versus a Tektro, not really going to be too much difference in that. Bigger rotors will stop you faster, but really just look for something with disc brakes on it, and like I said, preferably hydraulic. Next up is the frame geometry, and this is actually kind of a bigger one than you might think, because this is really like the one thing on a bike that you can't change. You can change out the brakes, you can change out the fork later on, upgrade them, but the frame is basically how it is unless you get a different bike. For me personally, I want something with more of a modern geometry. That means basically like a slacker head angle, so the wheel's a little bit farther out in front of you. Most bikes are going towards this trail style bike, so it's lower, longer, slacker. You have more stability at higher speeds. You have more control on descents and things like that. Versus old school bikes, what are now kind of just XC cross-country bikes, they're going to have a steeper head angle, something like 70 degrees. They're good for pedaling efficiency, but they're not good when things get rowdy, or they're not really like confidence inspiring on downhills and obstacles. So look for something with a geometry that fits the riding you're doing. For me and for a lot of people, that's going more towards the slacker head angle. And then the final thing on this kind of wish list, and this kind of fits in with the frame geometry, is also some modern standards on that frame. So those are things like a tapered head tube. And what a tapered head tube is really going to do for you, it's just going to open up future upgrade possibilities. Previously, and you'll still see it on a lot of bikes, they're just straight steerer tubes. And if you want to upgrade your fork, you're going to have kind of a limited choice of what you can find. Especially if you want to go for something higher end. Anything higher end is going to come with a tapered fork on it. So the other sort of modern standard is boost spacing with through axles. So you'll see that 148 spacing in the rear, that's a boost spacing. Similar situation, you know, if you ever want to upgrade your wheel set, you're just going to have a ton more options versus a bike that has the old school, I think it's like 135 quick release axles. You also get some more strength out of the wider hub and the wider wheel and the stronger axle. So 2 little things that you may not think about, but they're actually kind of more important than you would think. So without further ado, we're going to hop on the computer. We're going to look at 8 different bikes. This is not a hands-on test, unfortunately, but there is a lot of good information, a lot of good bikes that I've found. So here we go. So the first bike in this video is the giant Talon 2, and it's been featured on this channel. I've actually done a kind of a completely separate video on the 2020 version of this. First thing we'll take a look at, scroll down to the specs. You can see here, fork, it's the RockShox XC30. It's a coil spring, it's got preload adjust, and hydraulic lockout. So it is just a coil spring. Don't be fooled by that RockShox name. It's not some amazing fork. 30mm stanchions. I don't think it has any type of rebound adjustment. Next thing we'll take a look at is the drivetrain. So you can see the shifters, derailleurs, all those specs there. It's basically a mix of Shimano Acera and Olivio. It used to come with Dior components, so it's stepped down a little bit, but they're still decent components, and what those are all hooked up to and controlling is a 2x9 drivetrain. A 1x would be nice, but 2x is definitely good, 2x9 especially. It gives you a lot of range. In terms of the brakes, just below that, we'll see the Tektro hydraulic disc brakes. Another thing, I think it used to come with Shimano hydraulic disc brakes at some point, but these Tektros work fine. I had those on my first bike and never really had any complaints with them. Scroll down some more, you can see just tons of different geometry specs on the bike for different, even for the different frame sizes. Really the first thing I look at is the head tube angle. I mentioned that earlier. This is 68 degrees, so that's getting away from the super steep. It's also not super slack, it's kind of right in the middle there, so it's a good kind of do-it-all geometry on this bike. A couple of the other interesting things to point out too, the tires. So these are Maxxis Ardent. They are not tubeless ready like they used to be, but they are now 2.4 inches wide, so they're a wider tire. In theory, that'll give you better grip. So I like these tires. I've had the Ardents. I had 2.25 Ardents that I had them set up tubeless, but I really liked them. One other interesting thing to point out too on this bike is it comes in the 27.5 variant, and it also comes in the 29er version. I think the geometry is a bit different for the 29er, but you do have that option of whichever wheel size you prefer. You can get the Talon in that wheel size. So next up is a Diamondback bike. This is the Line. It's part of their Hookline Sinker series. As you go up in that series, you just get higher spec components on the same frame. So first thing we'll take a look at on this bike is the fork. This is an SR Suntour XCR 120mm of travel. I forgot to mention it on the Giant Talon, that was only 100mm of travel. So you get more travel on this fork. It does have 32mm stanchions, so it's going to give you a little bit more strength, at least in theory. Aside from that, you know, it's still just a coil spring fork. So in terms of drivetrain on this actually is a 1x system. Unfortunately, it's a 1x9. So it's a Shimano Acera Shadow setup. But like I said, it is only a 9-speed, so you're only getting 11 to 36 teeth in that rear cassette. And that is going to limit some of your climbing ability. You know, a lot of these 11-speed and even 10-speed systems, they come with at very minimum a 42, usually a 46 tooth in the back. Personally, I'm a little bit torn. You know, I love 1x systems, but I don't know if I would really want an 11 to 36. Alright, so we scroll down a little bit more, we can take a look at the brakes. Where are they? They're in there somewhere. So I will tell you, the way that they've done this thing on the website where they put everything on here, it's just a ton of information. You can't even find what you're looking for. I can find the brake levers, so Shimano MT200 hydraulic. So you're getting Shimano name brand brakes. That's nice. They're hydraulic. That's good. I don't see about the actual rotors themselves. They're probably 160mm, but I'm not sure. And we will scroll down some more to the geometry figures. Obviously, we'll look at that head tube angle first. Where is that? Right in the middle. 68 degrees. So basically the same or similar geometry to the Giant Talon. And I guess one other thing to mention on Diamondback, this is a direct-to-consumer brand now. So you order this thing online, you get it. It's up to you to put it together. And you know, the gearing and stuff like that should be adjusted out of the box, but there will be some assembly. You're not going to get that local bike shop experience. And that local bike shop experience is something you would actually get with a Giant Talon. You can order those online, but they're going to ship to a bike shop. The bike shop's going to put it together for you. You're really, like, I think, buying it through the bike shop, so you're going to get any kind of service deals that they offer, you'll get that. So that's another broad thing to just consider, you know, whether you want to buy something online, buy from a local shop. Alright, next up on this list is another online purchase only bicycle. So this is going to come from Chain Reaction Cycles. It's going to get shipped to you actually all the way from the UK. And I'm a little bit partial to this bike because I've owned one. It ticks a lot of the boxes of what I like. And really the only reason I got rid of it is because I wanted to get a full suspension bike. But let's go over the details on it. So this is the VRS model. There's a Nucleus 27 and a Nucleus 29. So the 29 version of this bike as well. Like the Giant Talon, I think the geometry specs are a little bit different. So we'll just look at the 27 for this video. So as you can see in the name on this bike, Dior 1x10. So this is a 1x system. 10 gears in the back, and it does give you a lot more range than the previous bike we looked at. So this is 11 to 46 in the rear. So you're going to get a really good climbing gear out of this. If you look at even some of the 11-speed drivetrains, they're mostly only 11 to 46 anyway, like a SRAM NX, for example. So this is going to be a really good drivetrain, especially for a bike at this price. Let's scroll down some more. We'll look at some of the other specs. So for the fork on this is another SR Suntour. This is an XCR32 Boost Air. So this ticks another couple of those boxes that I mentioned before. So you got the boost spacing in the front, although keep in mind that's just for the front fork. The rear of this bike is not boost spacing, and it's an air fork, so you're going to get all that adjustability that I mentioned before. The XCR32 from Suntour, that's really kind of like their first air fork in their kind of series, but still better than I think any coil spring fork that you'll look at. In terms of the brakes, let's scroll down. Where are they? There they are, right in the middle. So Tektro hydraulic brakes on this one, wave style rotors. I'm not really sure what that means. You got the 180 millimeter in the front, 160 in the rear, so you're gonna get a little bit more stopping power out of that 180 millimeter in the front, which is where you kind of need it the most. And it's a little bit hidden on here. If you want to look at geometry specs, what you need to do is go to the size chart here, click on that. It's actually going to pull up all the different Vitus bikes and all the different sizes. I'll save you some trouble going through that. In terms of this one, you've got a 66.5 degree head tube angle, so I think that's going to be the slackest of any that we're going to look at here. In terms of the 29er version of this bike, it's still a 67 degree head angle, so that's, you know, really good, really nice modern trail bike geometry. A couple of the other things to point out on this bike, so it's got the WTB Trail Boss and Vigilante combination of tires. That is a very sort of tried and true combination. Pretty sure they're just wire bead. I don't think you can set them up tubeless. And even down to some of the little minor details too, like the grips. I don't know if there's a good shot of those. There you go. They're single clamp lock-on grips. So, you know, there's a lot of good things about this bike. Alright, so next up is a Marin bike. So Marin, in terms of how you buy this bike, you can buy them online, have them shipped to you. There's also a lot of local shops that carry them, so they're a little bit of both. So the Bobcat Trail comes in at $735, and there are also quite a few things to like about this bike as well. So we'll jump into the specs first. In terms of the fork, you've got a SR Suntour XCM, 120 millimeters of travel. So when it comes to these SR Suntour XC whatever forks, basically it goes from the XCT to the XCM to the XCR and then the XCR Air. So this is right in the middle of their coil spring kind of lineup. Alright, we'll check out the drivetrain. This is a 2x9. It is Altus for the front and rear derailleur. And, you know, as I mentioned before, you'd really want it to be a 1x system, but the 2x9 will definitely do everything you need it to do on the trail. And in terms of the brakes, you've got Tektro hydraulic disc brakes, 160 millimeters front and rear for the rotors. If we come up here to the geometry, you'll see all the different geometry specs. Head angle, depending on the size, is going to be either 67 or 67.5. So that is actually some pretty good geometry on this bike. A couple other interesting things on this bike. You know, Marin is just kind of a cool bike brand. You know, Marin, the actual physical location, is kind of the birthplace of modern mountain biking. So I don't know, the name is just kind of cool to me. It probably factored in as to why I bought my Rift Zone. But on this bike, you've got internal cable routing. Some of the other bikes that we've talked about did. I just didn't mention it. But anyway, definitely a nice bike worth considering. So sticking with Marin on this next one, this is the San Quentin 1. And this is a little bit of a cheater. We'll scroll down to the overview here. You'll see the price is $899. Like I said, you can buy Marin bikes online. I think you can find them pretty regularly for like $840. So if your budget's $800, you know, maybe you can save up a little bit longer and get something like this. If not, skip over this one. So we'll take a look at some of the specs on this thing. Let's look at the fork first. SR Suntour XCM32. It is boost. It's 120 millimeters of travel. It's got a bolt-on through axle. So that's one of those things I mentioned before, kind of a little hidden thing. You've got that boost spacing in the fork. You've got the bolt-on through axle. So if you ever upgrade the fork, you're going to have a good set of wheels to go along with whatever new fork you get. Scroll up here. I think it's pretty obvious from this image that it's got a tapered head tube too, so it's got those kind of modern standards that I was mentioning. So let's jump back down. Drivetrain. This is a 1x9 system, very similar to what we saw on the Diamondback Line, 11 to 36 teeth in the rear. As with the Diamondback, you're not going to have a very good climbing gear out of this thing, but you do get the 1x system, which is nice, simpler, lighter. In terms of the brakes, you've got Tektro hydraulic disc brakes again on this one. 180 millimeter rotors in the front, so that's going to give you a little bit more stopping power where you need it. We will jump into the geometry here, and this is what really sets this bike apart. 65-degree head tube angle. So this, I may have said a different bike was the slackest of the bunch. This one actually is at 65 degrees. So really progressive geometry. It's going to make you feel really confident on the downhills and things like that. So this is kind of a bike that you don't necessarily buy for the components that come on it, more so you buy it for the frame, how it's built, how the geometry is. One other quick thing to mention too are the tires on this thing. So these are Schwalbe Hans Dampf tires. Is that what you actually get on the one? Well, let's take a look down here at the tires. So Marin, when they show these pictures, it's like they show pictures of all the different San Quentin bikes, even if you're just on the one. Alright, so V-tire, Crown Gem. I do believe that those are tubeless compatible though, so that's a nice little added bonus to have. Alright, so sticking with kind of another like cool bike brand is Kona. So this is their Lava Dome. I've had one person commented on my previous video, said the Lava Dome is the best hardtail he's ever ridden. I've never ridden one, so I can't say, but let's definitely take a look at it. $749. Looks like you can only buy it through a Kona dealer. Come down here to the specs, and we'll take a look at the fork. That's the SR Suntour XCR 32 coil spring, 100 millimeters of travel. And looking at the drivetrain, this is a mixture of Shimano, Alivio, and Altus. I think if you're looking at the hierarchy of Shimano, it kind of goes Altus, Acera, Alivio, and Dior, from mediocre to good. And then of course there's XT, XTR, all these crazy things. They're definitely out of this $800 price range. But hopefully that gives you an idea of where some of these Altus and Acera and those things, where they fall. Brakes, we have another set of Tektro HD, so hydraulic, 180 millimeter rotors in the front, 160 in the rear. We're seeing that a lot. Geometry, we can see that on the right here. Head tube angle, 68 degrees. So like I said, that's kind of that happy medium between a cross country and a trail bike. Personally, I don't see anything about this bike that just like stands out like, oh, this is the one to get. But like I said, people love these bikes, so it's worth considering. Alright, next up is the GT Avalanche Comp. I think this has been redesigned for 2020 from the frame up as far as I know. So you'll see $825 on the price point here. It's probably another one of those ones where you can find it for under $800 if you look hard enough. Scroll down, we'll take a look at some of the specs. The fork on this is the SR Suntour XCM, 100 millimeters of travel, coil spring fork. Something we've seen a lot here. Like I said, it's kind of that middle range of their coil spring forks. Heavy, works okay, it's not terrible. And don't be fooled by this hydraulic lockout air. So it's got some sort of air lockout on it, but it's not an air fork. Take a look at the drivetrain here. So this is a 10-speed, so it's a 1x10. And we'll scroll down more to the cog set, 11 to 42 on that 10-speed. So that is going to give you a little bit more climbing range, you know, that easier gear than you'll get on those ones that we've looked at with the 11 to 36. This is Shimano Dior for the rear derailleur. So that is a higher spec than any of those Alivio and Altus and Acera derailleurs. In terms of the brakes, we've got Shimano hydraulic disc brakes here. So you get the Shimano name brand. You've got 160 millimeter rotors on the front and the rear. And we can scroll back here, head over to the geometry. I'm sure this is pretty tiny on the screen, but it's 68.5 degree head tube angle. Another one of those ones that kind of falls in the middle, not too slack, not too steep. So one of the other little interesting things about this bike, and let's see if I can zoom in, you won't be able to tell from this angle, and I don't know if there's even going to be a good angle of it, but the seat stay design on this is interesting. So GT has for a long time done this sort of triple triangle design that they call right in the middle here. It's where the seat stays and the top tube and the seat tube all mount together, and it's really strong. What they've done on this bike is actually not connect the seat stays to the seat tube. They actually go up to the top tube, and what they say is that it allows a little bit more flex in the rear end. It's not like you're going to have a full suspension bike, but anything to kind of smooth out the ride just a little bit of a hardtail is definitely a good thing in my opinion. So the final bike on this list is actually kind of two bikes, and I'll explain why in just a second. So first here, Specialized Pitch Comp 1X. Specialized is really up their game in 2020 on these entry-level hardtails. And there's been a number of comments on my old video of like, how'd you not put the Specialized pitch in there? What about the Rockhopper comp? Well, at that time, they weren't like they are now. So here's the pitch. This is a 27.5, the Rockhopper comp. A little bit more money, it's $730. This is basically a 29er version of the other bike. Specs are almost identical. Geometry is a little bit different. So look at both of them. We'll just kind of focus on the pitch comp here at 700. Scroll down, get into some of these specs here. First thing we'll look at is the fork. SR Sun Tour, another XCM, coil spring, 100 millimeters of travel. There's 80 millimeters for some of the smaller sizes, but you know, I would imagine most people are going to be at the 100 millimeter size. It's got custom multi-circuit dampening. I'm not really sure what that means. That could be some sort of hydraulic dampening. I'm not really sure. One of the cool things about this is actually the drivetrain. So this is a Microshift Advent 1x9 drivetrain with a clutch. The clutch is basically a stronger spring that's going to keep that tension on the chain even on bouncy, chunky sections, so the chain doesn't fall off. Microshift is not one of the two big name brands, but it's gotten a lot of good reviews for their Advent system. As I said, it's a 9-speed, but unlike some of the other 9-speeds we've seen, it's 11 to 42 teeth. So I would have no problem riding that drivetrain around. 46 would be nice, but 11 to 42 with a clutch, you know, it's a nice drivetrain on this thing. Come back up, look at the brakes. You get the Shimano brakes on these, hydraulic disc. You get a larger 180 rotor in the front. And we'll jump into the geometry here. Scroll down a bit. Head tube angle 68.5. That's probably where you're going to find the bigger difference between this and the Rockhopper at the 29. Let's go over to that real quick. Technical specs. Where's that geometry? Right there. Scroll down. Head tube angle. So on the 29er version, you're getting a lot steeper head tube angle, and you'll see that in a lot of bikes. That's just kind of an industry thing. There are some bikes, kind of like my Rift Zone, that are going against that. That's got the 29er wheels, but it's also got the slacker head tube angle. But for the 29ers, it's almost like you don't quite need that head tube angle to be so slack, because you got the bigger wheels. They're going to roll over stuff better, and you're still going to have that trail confidence. Some of the other little things on this bike. One thing that I haven't really touched on a lot of these bikes, though, are things like hubs. There's things like hubs and bottom brackets. They're little things that can easily get overlooked, and a lot of times manufacturers can hide cheap parts in things like that because people don't really pay too much attention to them. You've got Shimano hubs on this bike versus some of the cheaper hubs that you'll find on some of the other bikes. And then, of course, you've got internal cable routing. And I know that I've only pointed that out on a few of these, and probably a lot more of them do have internal routing, but just know that this one does as well. So I am pretty impressed by the Specialized offering for these entry-level hardtails, especially compared to what they had in previous generations. So there you have my 8 hardtails, well, really 9 hardtails for under $800, all 2020 models. If you happen to be watching this video in 2021 or beyond, you'll probably find some outdated information. Search my channel. Maybe you'll find a newer version of it. I'll keep doing them as long as people keep finding them useful and getting something out of them. So like I said, this is sort of the list that I've compiled. You should do your own research. Think about what's most important to you with those sort of wish list items. What's important to me may not be important to you. Think about the type of riding you're doing. Test ride bikes if you can, but these are ones that I think are definitely worth looking into. So you know the deal from here. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up, think about subscribing to the channel, and I will see you next time.